I'm Alina, 28, and for most of my life, I was the daughter who never asked for much. I worked hard, got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and always believed that if I was patient and kind, my family would show up for me the way I showed up for them. But I was wrong. I was just the placeholder, convenient when needed, invisible when not. I had spent years watching my younger brother, Rayan, get whatever he wanted. New car at 18?
Done.
Dropping out of college twice and still being praised for trying? Expected. Meanwhile, I had to take out loans for university and never once complained. I believed my time would come. I believed my parents had my back. I was engaged to someone wonderful. Aarav, a kind, stable man with a quiet sense of humor and a fierce loyalty I had never experienced before. We'd been dating for 3 years when he proposed, and it was one of the few times I felt like something was happening just for me. I remember sitting with my mom and dad at dinner a week after the engagement, their faces beaming with pride as they said they'd been saving for this day. "It's not much, Beta," my dad had said, "but we put aside money for your wedding. It's yours. You deserve a proper celebration." I was touched. It felt like everything was falling into place. We started venue hunting, looking at dresses, comparing catering options, and the anticipation of building a life with Aarav grew stronger by the day. Then Rayan lost his job. At first, it was just a temporary layoff, something about company restructuring. But within a month, he had maxed out 2 credit cards and crashed the car my parents had bought him. Still, they coddled him, treating him like a fragile glass ornament. "He's just under pressure," my mom would say. "He's going through a phase," my dad insisted. Then one evening, as I returned home from a fitting appointment, my parents sat me down in the living room. I knew something was wrong from their faces. My mother looked everywhere, but at me. My father cleared his throat and said, "Alina, we had to use some of the wedding fund." The air left my lungs. "What do you mean, son?" I asked. My dad avoided eye contact. "We gave it to Rayan. For his business idea. He's really serious about it this time." My hands went cold. "You mean the entire fund, don't you?" My mom finally looked up. "He needed a fresh start. It's family. He's your brother. You can plan something simpler, right?" I stared at them in silence, stunned that they didn't even look guilty, just inconvenienced by my reaction. That night, I cried for hours. Aarav was supportive, furious but calm. "Let's wait," he said. "Let them realize what they've done. Maybe they'll fix it." But they didn't. Instead, they began hinting that maybe a courthouse wedding was more practical, that big weddings were a waste. The betrayal stung. Not just because of the money, but because of the message it sent. I didn't matter. And then came the incident that broke whatever thread was left holding our family together. My sister Sana, who had always been a passive observer in the family drama, invited me and Aarav over for dinner. She had married a man named Faizan 3 years ago, a smug, self-absorbed man who always looked at me like I was beneath him. During dinner, as I was quietly eating, Faizan started talking about weddings. "Honestly," he said while pouring himself wine, "girls these days expect way too much. Everyone wants a fairy tale, but no one wants to pay for it. They just want handouts from their daddies." He didn't look at me, but everyone knew it was about me.
Sana Laugen.
My mother smiled awkwardly. My father said nothing. Aarav clenched his jaw but stayed silent out of respect. I sat there, humiliated, my fork frozen in the air. And then Faizan added, "I mean, if you can't even manage your own wedding, what kind of wife are you going to be?" The wine glass was in my hand before I even realized it. In one sharp movement, I stood and flung its contents across the table. The red liquid hit Faizan square in the chest, soaking his shirt. The table fell into silence. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Faizan roared, standing up and knocking over a chair. Sana ran to him, holding a napkin. "She's lost her mind." My mother gasped. My father shook his head in disbelief. "Alina, how could you behave like this?" My mom's voice was shrill. "He was just making conversation." I looked around the room and realized no one, not one person, was on my side. No one defended me. No one acknowledged the insult. Instead, I was the problem. Aarav took my hand and quietly said, "Let's go." As we walked out, I knew something inside me had shifted. I was done begging for respect, done hoping for fairness. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Aarav turned to me and said, "Let's just leave. Let's elope. We don't need their blessing. We have each other." I didn't even hesitate. "Yes," I whispered. "Let's do it." The morning after that disastrous dinner, I woke with a strange calmness blanketing me. There was no more space for anger or heartbreak, only clarity. My entire life had been a series of compromises, making myself smaller to fit into spaces my family allowed me, always the second thought to Rayan, always the outsider at my own table. But something had snapped, and now there was no going back. Aarav and I quietly began making plans. We didn't share anything with anyone, not even close friends. We found a small coastal town a few hours away and contacted a local officiant. It wasn't extravagant or grand, but it was intimate, peaceful, and ours. I picked a simple ivory dress from a boutique near my office and asked a coworker to take a few days off for an unofficial honeymoon. No questions asked. The day we left, I placed a note on the kitchen counter at my parents' house. Just a few lines thanking them for everything they had once done and letting them know we had decided to marry privately. There was no bitterness in my words, just finality. Aarav and I exchanged vows on a cliffside as the waves crashed below, the breeze dancing through my hair like it knew I was finally free. I looked into his eyes and realized that, for the first time, I was stepping into something built on mutual respect and choice, not obligation or guilt. Afterward, we stayed in a modest inn, cooked dinner together, and spent hours talking about what kind of life we wanted: simple, real, free of people who saw us as pawns in their emotional games. The peace lasted until we returned. My phone had over 50 missed calls and a flood of messages. First from my mother, then Sanaa, then Rayan. My father had even tried calling Aarav. The initial tone was shock, followed by fury. "How could you do this to us? You embarrassed the family. After everything we've done for you." They never asked if I was happy. Never asked if I felt safe. Only accusations, cold, self-centered, dramatic. When I didn't respond, the messages intensified. Sanaa sent a voice note crying, saying I had humiliated her in front of Faison, that I had ruined the peace of the family by throwing that glass of water like some unstable drama queen. My mother's texts were filled with disappointment, shaming me for taking such a big step without permission. As if my life still belonged to them, as if getting married without their blessing was an unforgivable betrayal, but giving away my wedding fund to my brother was not. I ignored them. I muted their chats. I tried to move forward, but they weren't done. They began reaching out to extended family, twisting the story. Soon I was hearing from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts sent me lengthy messages about how family must be honored above pride. One even had the audacity to suggest that if I'd been more agreeable, my parents might have helped me more. That's when I realized my family wasn't just blind, they were actively invested in preserving the illusion of control and tradition, no matter how much it hurt the individual inside it. Aarav encouraged me to block them all, and for a while I did. But the silence didn't last. Just when I began to feel some sense of normalcy, Rayan showed up unannounced. He stood at our door with a bouquet of wilted flowers and a look of theatrical regret. He launched into a monologue about how sorry he was for the way things had gone, how the business hadn't worked out, how he felt awful that I had to change my wedding plans. But it wasn't a real apology. It was just enough of one to make himself feel better. He never mentioned the money, never offered to return it. Instead, he hinted that things were really tight and maybe Aarav could help him network into a new job. That was the moment I fully understood that Rayan hadn't changed and never would. He saw me as a backup plan, an ATM and a dress, and now that I was married to a man with stability, he saw us both as tools. I told him politely that we couldn't help, closed the door and cried, not because I was sad, but because I felt vindicated. The line between my old life and my new one had been drawn in permanent ink. As days passed, Sanaa sent another message. This time, she tried a different tactic. She said she was pregnant and couldn't handle the family tension anymore, that my absence was creating stress in her marriage, and that I needed to apologize to Faison to restore peace. The sheer audacity of it nearly made me laugh. I didn't respond. I knew if I gave even an inch, they would take the mile they believed they were entitled to. But their narrative didn't stop there. Apparently, they had begun telling everyone that I had eloped because Aarav pressured me into it, painting him as controlling and me as the naive girl manipulated into rebellion. I began to notice the shift in some relatives' behavior. A few even asked Aarav if he had forgiven me for disrespecting the elders. The mental gymnastics were exhausting. Even when I had removed myself from the equation, they still tried to make me the villain. My father called one day, voice low, asking if I would just come for a family dinner to clear the air. He said my mother hadn't been sleeping well, that Sana was crying constantly, and that Rayan had lost his spark. I almost said yes, out of old habit, but then I remembered the empty promises, the dinner table humiliation, the silent betrayal. I told him I would not be attending, and if they truly cared, they'd be reaching out to acknowledge their role in the damage, not begging me to pretend nothing had happened. He sighed and hung up. A few days later, I received an invitation to a family reunion, organized by Sana and my parents. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Aarav, but the message inside made no mention of our marriage. No congratulations. Just an event date and a note saying, "We hope you can come make things right." That was the final confirmation that they hadn't accepted anything. Not my autonomy, not my marriage, not the truth of what had happened. They didn't want healing. They wanted control restored. They wanted the illusion of harmony, not actual resolution. I tossed the invitation in the bin and stepped into the living room where Aarav was reading. He looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that holds more love than my entire family had ever shown me in years. I sat beside him, took his hand, and silently vowed to build a life where I would never again have to beg for basic respect. The weeks that followed brought a silence, so heavy it almost felt like grief, but in its stillness, I found clarity. The air in my home was no longer thick with the pressure to perform daughterly duties or navigate manipulative emotional traps. There were no sudden visits, no accusatory messages, no tear-filled voice notes, just peace. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I immersed myself in work, in long walks with Aarav, in late-night movies without checking my phone out of dread. Slowly, I was reclaiming the version of myself I had always buried under years of compliance. But even then, the past found ways to linger. At a colleague's engagement party, I ran into a distant cousin who pulled me aside with a well-meaning smile and a patronizing tone. She said the family was worried about me, that my decision to elope was seen as drastic and out of character. I didn't correct her. I realized it was pointless to explain choices to people who were never interested in understanding. Their version of events was safer, cleaner, one that allowed them to remain comfortably oblivious to their own roles in perpetuating dysfunction. The truth was far messier and far less convenient. But I had made peace with not being understood. I wasn't living my life for their approval anymore. It wasn't until spring bloomed that I heard from my father again. He emailed me instead of calling, a short note telling me that Rayan had moved back in with them after another failed business attempt, and that my mother had been unwell. There was a subtle undertone of guilt woven into every sentence, an appeal for sympathy, not accountability. The message ended with a request. If I could visit my mother, it would mean a lot to her. For a brief moment, I wrestled with the idea. Maybe time had softened them. Maybe illness had shifted priorities. But then I remembered every time they'd asked something of me cloaked as family concern, only to twist the narrative when it didn't serve their image. I decided I wouldn't ignore the message, but I also wouldn't play along. I replied with polite concern for her health and asked if she needed anything specific sent her way. There was no follow-up. No response. That was confirmation enough. The outreach hadn't been about mending anything, it had been a bait, a test of whether I would fold back into their script. I had not. I would not. Months passed. Aarav and I began building new traditions, weekend road trips, cooking together on Sundays, having friends over for game nights. I found myself surrounded by people who celebrated my wins without resentment, who supported me without strings attached. Maya, my college roommate and longtime friend, became a regular part of our life again, and it was with her and Aarav that I finally shared the full story of everything. Every betrayal, every dismissal, every invisible wound that had led me to throw a glass of water on Faison's smug face. They didn't try to fix it. They didn't make excuses. They just listened. And that, I realized, was what true family did. They bore witness to your pain without making it about themselves. Slowly, my circle grew. A couple from our neighborhood invited us to their child's birthday party. Aarav's co-workers began including me in their gatherings. People who had no obligation to me were giving me more warmth than my own blood ever had. It was bittersweet, but more than anything, it was healing. Then came the news I had been half expecting. Sana gave birth. She didn't reach out herself. Instead, I found out through a public social media post. The caption was syrupy sweet, about family and blessings and overcoming hard times, but it was the comments that revealed the truth. Several relatives tagged me with passive-aggressive remarks about how I was missing milestones and should learn to forgive before it's too late. It was a strange thing to grieve a relationship that never truly existed in the way I thought it did. I wasn't mourning Sana's child. I was mourning the sisterhood I had convinced myself we had, one where I believed she would someday stand up for me, speak truth to our parents, maybe even see through her husband's cruelty. But that fantasy died long ago, drowned somewhere between Faison's insults and Sana's willful silence. I didn't comment. I didn't message. I closed the app and spent the evening playing card games with Aarav. When the people who love you are right in front of you, the urge to chase those who don't fades. As the one-year anniversary of our elopement approached, Aarav surprised me with a weekend getaway. We revisited the coastal town where we exchanged our vows, walking the same cliffside path with the waves crashing below. It felt like returning to the scene of a quiet revolution, where I had chosen myself over a lifetime of emotional crumbs. We sat at the same small restaurant overlooking the sea, and I found myself smiling without effort. The weight of what I'd left behind no longer anchored me. I realized I had spent so long trying to earn love from people who only understood loyalty when it benefited them. I had given them chances, explanations, and forgiveness they never asked for and never deserved. In walking away, I hadn't abandoned my family, I had rescued myself. A few days after we returned, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, the lines uneven, as if written in haste or hesitation. She wrote that she missed me, that family was everything, and that one day I would understand the decisions they made. She ended the note with an underlined line, "We hope you can come back home soon." I folded the letter slowly and placed it in a drawer without replying. There was no apology in her words. No ownership. Just a veiled request to fall back in line. But I wasn't going back. Not to the family dinners where I had to tolerate veiled insults. Not to the passive-aggressive phone calls. Not to the silent expectation that my silence would protect their pride. I had spent years choosing peace over confrontation. Now I understood they were never the same thing. In the quiet of my own home, surrounded by people who respected me, loved me, and didn't ask me to justify my boundaries, I built something better. It wasn't loud. It wasn't traditional. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.